you so much for that very nice introduction. Also, with gratitude to Most Venerable Metta Vihari, whom I had the honor of meeting several times. Now, I'm going to share my screen. So can you all see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. I now need to know. Yep, play from the start. Wonderful. So thank you very much, Professor Serenaika, for giving me the opportunity to present a topic which I am extremely interested in, and that is in the wake of honoring Sangamitta Mahatheri, who arrived from Jambudvipa, the continent, to Sri Lanka or Tambapani in that very historic arrival with her entourage. In that own same way, in the footsteps, Sri Lanka also has Devasara Theri and her Sangha from the land of the lion. That is, the references that are there in the Chinese Buddhist text to Sri Lanka, who established the Bhikkhuni Sangha in China. This might come as new and interesting information to you. But first of all of this and what follows belongs to the legacy of Mahaprajapati Gautami Mahatheri, an unparalleled legacy in world history of sustained leadership, trust, discipline, service, and sustained compassion, reverberating far beyond the decisions she took and her Dhamma leaders took some 2,500 years ago. She was the founder of the world's first recognized international women's order. And we move to Sangamitta Mahatheri, the Dhamma envoy of the Asokan Empire, who brought the Bhikkhuni Sangha and the Bodhi sapling to Sri Lanka over 2,300 years ago. Sangamitta Mahatheri also changed the history of Buddhism in the world. Now, I have been very curious about Devasara Theri and her entourage ever since about 8 to 9 years ago. I started researching into the issues pertaining to gender and Buddhism because of my background in the environmental side, and because I was also in many ways a kind of a witness to the creation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And in the days gone by, my habit was to compare the Buddha Dhamma with the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, to see how they would fare in the light of the SDGs. And one of the very important aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals is, of course, gender equality. So when I was reading this paper by Dr. Hema Gunathilaka, I came across information about Devasara Theri And it was only recently that I started looking into her accomplishments. I searched quite a bit, couldn't find much information, and I didn't know about the existence of the Chinese Buddhist texts. And to my perhaps positive karma, I was led to two very interesting bhikkhunis. The first being Venerable Bhikkhuni Lan, who is a lecturer at the Sri Lanka International Buddhist Academy at Pallakale in Kandy. And then I was also led to Venerable Ayya Sangamitta at an online meeting. And for the first time, she presented a spate of Chinese Buddhist historical texts pertaining to Devasara Theri and her group in China. And then they sent me an entire gamut of texts, which I will elaborate as we go on. So, to just explain to you, to give you a background of what these Chinese Buddhist texts are. So, the Chinese canon includes a massive section for texts written by East Asian masters, such as commentaries, histories, biographies, and so on. So we have in the Pali canon, as you know, the Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, the various collections of the suttas. In the Chinese text, they're referred to as the agamas. They are the parallel collections in the Chinese canons. And they are the Chinese translations of the sutras preserved by other early Mahayana schools. So, what is the Taisho Tripitaka, which I will be referring to you as we go on, the Pali parallel of that? The Taisho is the equivalent of a council edition or the Pali. Now, to bring it down to modern day terms, for instance, like the Pali text PTS edition or version, it is a standardized printed version of the entire collection. It was compiled in Japan in the early 20th century, and then it is the international standard reference for East Asian traditions. The T number, every single text in the Taisho canon is assigned a unique sequential number prefixed with a T. And then with the T, you have the faciles. The Pali parallel of a facile is similar to a long chapter, volume scroll of a very large text. Because the texts were traditionally written on scrolls, a facile represents a manageable unit, a short sutta, a long sutta, or a large text like a sutra, which may be several faciles long. So the entire collection, for your interest, the Chinese Tripitaka, is available online. And the two venerable bhikkhunis whom I mentioned earlier also put me in touch with these extraordinary publications, which are also available online, free of charge, from the Numata Center for Buddhist Translation and Research. The Lives of Great Monks and Nuns, Particularly, I'll be quoting from the biographies of Buddhist nuns and the journey of the eminent monk Faxian. And these are all available, as I said earlier, in English, and they're translated by several, but I have seen several translations, but I'll be only using the translations by the Chinese Buddhist scholar Li Rongji. I have mentioned these before. And also, Dr. Hema Gunatilaka's, please take the time to read her paper, which is also available online, called The Unbroken Lineage of the Sri Lankan Bhikkhuni Sangha from 3rd BCE to the present. So, in the history of the Dhamma, among world traditions, we have a verifiable, authentic, continuous change of evidence in the form of inscriptions, archaeological evidence, and eyewitness accounts. We have, for instance, the Kharoshthi inscriptions, the earliest surviving Buddhist manuscripts written in the Kharoshthi script, discovered in the Gandhara regions, already contained discourses matching the Pali Nikayas. Then, of course, as you know only well, the edicts of Emperor Asoka in the 3rd century BCE. And also, I'd like to point out that I'm sure you may know this, but in one of the edicts of Emperor Asoka, the mission to Tambapani is engraved in rock and mentioned. So then we have, of course, our own inscriptions dating back many years. The Rajagala inscriptions, for instance, which cite the visit of Venerable Mahinda Thera and one other to the area. And then you have the Greek sources like Megasthenes, Vansikritus, and so on. The Greek ambassador Megasthenes was there immediately after the defeat of Alexander's generals' troops, Seleucus, who tried to conquer India and was driven back. So we have all this information, but the interesting thing here is that we also have an eyewitness account, a first-hand account in the form of the travels of this great Venerable Faxian, 399 to 414 CE. Of all the pilgrims who set forth from foreign lands, only Faxian reached the Lion Kingdom of Sri Lanka. So I find, as an ex-diplomat, his record of Buddhist kingdoms absolutely fascinating. Because he writes about, he was during the time of King Mahanama's reign, and he gives a first-hand account of the situation concerning Buddhism at that time. The record of his record of the Buddhist kingdoms is, of course, in Chinese, and you can easily check this one out. And then you have also the Chinese text is within the translation and annotated version by James Legge. So I just want to, before I get into Devasara, put this in context. It is quite interesting to see in his travels, he says, the monastics and laity, the four assemblies gathered to listen to the Dhamma in the land of the lion. The four assemblies. I don't want to go into it, but I would urge you all to really study this eyewitness account of some really interesting chapters about the state of the Buddha Dhamma and the high quality of the practice of the Buddha Dhamma at that time in the land of the lion. And so also in his travels, there is a very interesting statement where he also writes about, or it is recorded in his travels, about the situation about the Buddha Dhamma in China. And there is this very interesting statement. The king of China also believes in Buddhism and honors the monks. So the travels of what he has observed, particularly in this connection, is also in the Chinese Buddhist canon in the reference that I have given you. It is essential to recognize a couple of things. The arrival of the Buddha, of Sangamitta Mahatheri, Mahinda Thera, and their groups to Tambapani, the travels of Devasara Theri and her group to China. These are all not done through some quirk of fate suddenly. They have been done through, and they represent years of coordinated initiatives with very careful strategic planning, royal patronage, monastic leadership, and unwavering commitment to the Buddha Dhamma. And so, it is also said in the Chinese Tripitaka, in this reference, in the 5th year of the Yuanija reign, the king of the Lion Kingdom, Mahanama, sent envoys bearing a model of the Buddha's tooth relic shrine as a tribute. This particular image I have taken from our current tooth relic at the Daladama Ligawa. This is not the one that was sent, but it is interesting that this record is there in the Chinese Buddhist texts to see the diplomatic exchanges that took place between Sri Lanka and China at that time. I also want to, because I'll be quoting the biographies of Buddhist nuns, to explain Bao Chang, who wrote the biographies of Buddhist nuns, which is called the Taisha Canon T2063. Bao Chang was a Chinese Buddhist monk and a historian who lived in the Liang dynasty. He devoted his life to preserving early Buddhist records, especially accounts of monastics from India, Sri Lanka, who shaped Chinese Buddhism. As I said earlier, one of his most important works was to write about the biographies of Buddhist nuns, and that's the Taisho 2063. And as I again said earlier, and I'd like to repeat, that this is available, both the texts are available in Chinese as well as in English. It is fascinating reading. You may say, of course, when you look at the Pali Canon, the Tripitaka, and over some 10,000 discourses, it is enough and more than enough for an individual or a lifetime. But I just want to tell you that there is an other extraordinary world when you also look into the Chinese Buddhist texts and their relevance to the Lion Kingdom. And so in this, biographies of Buddhist nuns are the faciles or the record of Devasara Theri, whom is called Tesalu, and her Sri Lankan Bhikkhuni teams who established the Bhikkhuni order. Dr. Hema Gunathilaka also in her paper refers to the Bhikkhunis who went to China, and she says that they were affiliated to the Abhayagiri monastery. Farsian spent about 2 years at the Abhayagiri monastery. So it is extremely probable, as Dr. Gunathilaka surmises, that there would have been some interesting discussions between Farsian and the Bhikkhuni Sangha who were most likely residing there. It is also possible that although Farsian passed away in 422, it is possible that he may have initiated with the rulers of China the possibility of a visit from the Bhikkhuni Sangha as well to China. So, the first arrival, the earliest documentation of Sri Lankan Bhikkhunis to reach China arrived in 428 CE, recorded in the biographies of Buddhist nuns. In the year 428, a foreign ship owner named Nandi, so this is probably a very enterprising Sri Lankan shipping merchant, traveled from the land of the lions with some nuns who arrived in the capital of Song. Song is the term for China, and stayed at the Jingfu nunnery. I tried to investigate where this Jingfu nunnery is, but it is at the moment an area or location that does not come up in the records. So, in another text in the biographies of the Buddhist nuns, in number 2063, it states the first group of 8 bhikkhunis who arrived earlier had already learned the language of song. Please pay attention to this, because these were enterprising individuals. As you know only too well, and I know this from my years in the United Nations, the Chinese language is a pretty tough language to learn. I think everybody, all the translators in the UN acknowledge that fact. But for the present moment and for our own discussions today, just to say that the language of song is Chinese, and the Sri Lankan nuns needed to achieve. Please remember that the Sri Lankan nuns needed to achieve a sufficient level of Chinese proficiency to communicate the Vinaya effectively and to conduct and prepare themselves to conduct the solemn monastic ceremony required for ordination. So it came to pass that, of course, from the Vinaya specifications, that 8 was not enough. So I'm sure emissaries and representatives would have gone to Sri Lanka, and a second journey ensued. But for the moment, to say that the record states that the first group who went were those who became extremely familiar with the with Chinese life. And I have recreated here what might be the nunnery that they may have stayed. And also, just to point out that they all, the 8 of them, became fluent and conversant in Chinese. And here they are. This is my creation of them hard at work learning Chinese in their nunnery. So, the second group, in the footsteps of Sangamitta Mahatheri, here is Devasara Theri, who led her team of 11 who established the Bhikkhuni order in China, standing in front of the great Abhayagiri Vihara. Devasara Theri, and here is a biographical profile that I have put together from the Chinese Buddhist texts, was a senior nun from Anuradhapura, the great capital of ancient Sri Lanka, who carried the living lineage of the Bhikkhuni Sangha established by Sangamitta Mahatheri 8 centuries earlier. By the early 5th century, she was already, as one can glean from the Chinese Buddhist texts, a respected Vinaya teacher, which would have been a position requiring long experience and monastery of the discipline, and was likely attached to one of the great nunneries, perhaps affiliated to Abhayagiri or even Jetavana monasteries. Venerable Devasara is explicitly named in the early Chinese Buddhist literature. So she's the only one, unlike in the case, for instance, in the Dipavamsa, where you have all the entourage together with Sangamitta Mahatheri clearly mentioned and described. In the case of the Chinese Buddhist texts, she's the only one who is mentioned, named. Now, how long would this voyage take place? And it is easy, to some extent, I say that with a certain element of caution, to calculate how long they may have taken, because in Farsian's Travels of Farsian, it is said that the time for travel for a very good merchant vessel at that time from Ralipti to Sri Lanka would have taken 14 days and nights. So a well-built one at the speed of around about 2.1 to 2.4 knots might take, say, 11 weeks at sea. But I am hazarding that it would take, that is without any stops or whatever. So travel from Sri Lanka to Nanjing, where they went to, would have taken much, much longer, going and keeping to the Southeast Asian coastal areas to stop for food and provisions and water and so on. So the second arrival is recorded as being during 433 BC, which is the formal mission, and the Chinese Buddhist texts say in the 10th year, 433, the shipowner Nandi came again with 11 nuns, Devasara, and others from the land of the lion. And here is a construction of what the arrival might be of Devasara Theri and her group. What a wonderful sight this might have been. And then I'd like to point out to you a little bit about the characteristics of the Sri Lankan Bhikkhuni Sangha and how they were observed by the Chinese Buddhist community at that time, which are recorded in the Chinese Buddhist texts. This would be of great interest to all of us. So this is facile 3, which concerns in the biography of the Buddhist nuns, the biography of Senjing, who was the first nun to be ordained. She was ordained twice, once before and then after Devasara Theri came together with her entourage, completing the requirements. But in her description, there is a recording of her comments about the Sri Lankan Bhikkhuni Sangha. Their deportment and discipline were exceptional. Please note this sentence. She observes their deportment and discipline were exceptional. It was very clear that they treated Devasara Theri not as some kind of a person or her group as functional tools to fix a rule. And so the text explicitly tells us that it wasn't just their presence that convinced the Chinese community. They were not there to fill in numbers. It was their presence of mind and conduct. So I have broken down this with the help of the venerable Bhikkhuni who provided me with this documentation. The the Chinese terms concerning this particular statement, which goes as follows: all of them, literally deportment or air, and another term is bamboo joint, meaning implying integrity or discipline, and another term which means exceptional or outstandingly different. And here they are. What might be the construction of them entering a monastery with the Chinese community, observing them with respect. Why does this matter in the entire field of the Buddha Dhamma and even Dhammic diplomacy? Visual authority in a foreign land where they likely did not speak the language fluently, their integrity did the talking. Their posture, silence, synchronized movement communicated the Dhamma. Universal respect. The text notes outstanding difference. Their sheer dignity commanded respect from the Chinese aristocracy and the monastic elite alike. There isn't a single description of an international delegation in the Chinese Buddhist texts that comes anywhere near these kinds of descriptions. It was this visible dignity, not just their certificates of lineage, that inspired the Chinese nun Senjik to request reordination. She did not seek them out just because they were foreign. She sought them out because they radiated authority she wanted to emulate. So there are, I'm going to do this a little quickly. In the Tripitaka, in our Pali canon, you also have references to presence in the Tripitaka. I was rather struck by the connection. There are lots of references about deportment in the Tripitaka, and here is an example. Bimbisara, the king of Magadha in ancient India, and a contemporary and a devoted patron of the Buddha, and he, in the Sutta Nipata 3.1, going forth Pabajja Sutta, records the time when King Bimbisara first saw the Buddha, and his comments when he first looked at the Buddha. And he says, "Pay heed, sirs, to this one. Pay heed, sirs, to this one. Accomplished in deportment." Listing the distinguishing characteristics of the Buddha, he remarked that the Buddha was accomplished in deportment. Charanena chasampanno. So they were masters of the Vinaya, the Devasara Sangha. We can now go into the ordination proceedings. And the other interesting thing, which is quite remarkable in the Chinese Buddhist texts, is the recording that the Devasara Sangha came to China bearing the Vinaya precepts. They were masters in their knowledge of the Vinaya. And here is a reconstruction that I have made of Bhikkhuni or Venerable Devasara instructing Gunavaran, one of the Indian masters who was present in China. This is my own construction of matters pertaining to the Vinaya, because it was, as you will see from the text following, a bone of contention. So, I'm going to skip a little bit and go into the fact that the Chinese Buddhist texts record that before the arrival of the Sri Lankan Bhikkhuni Sangha, there was the view that the Bhikkhuni Vinaya was incomplete. After their arrival, it was complete. So the transition alone proved functional Vinaya mastery, not symbolic authority. One does not bring Vinaya unless one is qualified to teach, enact, and safeguard it. And the Chinese Buddhist texts on the Devasara Sangha leave no room for a symbolic interpretation. No mysticism, no later embellishment, just discipline, institutional history, and the texts are unambiguous. So here we go in now to the last section, which is about the Bhikkhuni ordination. And as regrettably in the in China, as in several other places, there was contention and controversy about the whole ordination of the Bhikkhuni Sangha, regrettably and sadly, at that time. So this particular facile 14 in the collected records of the translations of the Tripitaka speaks about the fact that there was a discussion about this. So there is also the reference to the presence of an Indian Vinaya Dhamma master called Gunavaman. Now, there was a very interesting discussion and debate because the Chinese Buddhist texts record that a venerable called Hui Yi held different views about the Bhikkhuni ordination, leading to a heated debate back and forth. Then Venerable Gunavaman set forth his main principle and demonstrated the Dhamma, proving his reasoning sound and acceptable. Then Venerable Hui Yi reversed his stubborn prejudice, completely yielded, and was convinced. He subsequently led his disciples to receive the precepts. Hundreds of monks and nuns received the ordination. So says the Chinese Buddhist texts. The prince of Pensheng of the Song dynasty, revered for his model of precepts and widely provided vegetarian offerings, observed in the Buddhist texts that the fourfold assembly became flourishing and drew the city's attention. So I am now recreated this interesting event that may have taken place in front of the prince between the Chinese venerable and Gunavaran, who replied to all the various objections or questions that were raised. So the ordination of Venerable Senjing in this particular reference, facile 3 from T2059. Venerable Senjing was at the Chongsheng monastery in most likely in the Nanjing area. She was a native of the Lu commandery, and in her youth she was fond of the Buddha Dhamma. She recited the Tripitaka suttas, Vinaya scriptures, and she was very widely knowledgeable. When there was this commander who was sent out to govern Canton, he brought her along to travel with him, and there she met the Devasara Sangha. And there was the remark about the way they conducted themselves. And so she then sought to receive instructions concerning the becoming of a fully ordained nun. And so she was ordained. And here she is, the first fully ordained Bhikkhuni in China. Just have a look at this and ponder about this, because this is history, totally forgotten and bypassed in the world by the Disneyland ritualized Buddhism that appears to be practiced. This is verified history. And this is verified history of the impact of the Bhikkhuni Sangha, unmatched in Sri Lankan Buddhist texts, unmatched in Sri Lankan Buddhist history. Far away from the Disneyland ritualized Buddhism that we see around in the world today. And here she is at a much older, passing on the Buddha Dhamma to hundreds as recorded in China. So the mission of the Devasara Sangha was not symbolic diplomacy nor theoretical endorsement. It was Vinaya in action. The result was irreversible. From this moment onwards, the Bhikkhuni Sangha in China stood on a legally valid and continuous foundation. And because of this transmission, China established a continuous Sangha which has impacted Southeast Asia and today through that the world over. Devasara, Theri, and her Bhikkhuni Sangha and their historical impact stands as a rare, well-documented case of Dhammic diplomacy. Erudite, holistic, disciplined, and effective. No armies, no drama, and no spectacle. And here is a construction of Devasara, Theri, and her incredible group walking through majestically through the streets of Nanjing, looked upon in reference. Dhamma friends, I give you a case study authenticated of the impact of this extraordinary Dhamma leader and her entourage, unparalleled in the Buddhist world. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Don, for that spellbinding, all that hard work that you have done, because this is very ancient history. I mean, so many centuries ago. And what you have found out and presented so, with the illustrations and going to the most difficult of languages. Thank you. It's really humbling. I'm just thinking, Don, that recently our association put out a book based on a webinar that we had with Consul General in Thailand at that end on the visit of Venerable Upali Mahathera and the Upasampada. So that's a full little booklet, but it's very informative as far as information goes and a sort of library material, really. But a similar thing should be done by you on the visit of Devasara, which is so captivating and such a large population, country with such a large population that this diplomatic, from a tiny island, goes to China. And the deportment, as you say, without oral communication, just their deportment spoke volumes, even at the start. So I'll open the floor to any more questions and comments. But Don, thank you very much and congratulations on that superlative work that you have done. Amazing. And you were lucky. Did you find any photographs on the Facebook of that Sinhalese monk who happened to be in that temple in Nanjing?
He has sent me a spate of photographs, but the temple that he is in is not the one that the Devasara Sangha stayed in. It was a different temple that he had sent information about.
And
so one day I hope that we will find the temple and the place where this incredible group stayed.
And this monk Gunavarma, who gave all that support, he was Indian, wasn't he?
He was
Or-
Indian, yes. There were two of them. He was one of them.
Anuja.
Ordered.
Anuja, you wanted to say something.
Yes, I'd like to congratulate you, Don, on that fascinating presentation and the meticulous research you have done. It's absolutely excellent. And as Manu suggested, I think it should be put into a booklet or plus, I would say, an article to the newspapers in Sri Lanka, because I think the Sri Lankan public is not aware of these details. And the fantastic contribution made by our Sri Lankan nuns, as you said, unparalleled in history. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Ambassador Vijayasekara, and thank you, Professor Senlaika, for those comments. I'm going to comment on it, on some of the things that you have raised, but before that, I'll see if there are others who want to make any contributions. Don't be shy. I'm going to cite you and ask you questions. If you become very shy. Professor Salheva, what do you think of this?
I can only support what Manori and Anuja told. I mean, it's a absolutely incredible narration. It was, I mean, nothing surprising. The sort of research you do on this subject, how much of material you had collected, it's beyond me even to imagine how all that could have been done. It's absolutely incredible and so fascinating to listen to. And as Anuja pointed out, definitely this has to be published, but I don't think anyone, hardly any, know about all this history. You know, the extent to which the Sri Lankan diplomacy, the connections that existed in the two countries, and the tremendous impact this missionary had done to as as such a large country as China. So congratulations, Don. It's extremely valuable and definitely needs to be published.
So I can't understand now. If there was another country, I'm just surmising, please forgive me for this. If there was another country and there was this group and there was this history of civilizational impact, there is so much of discussion these days in geopolitics about civilizational this and civilizational that. But the activities recorded and authenticated by the Devasara Sangha had civilizational impact, and these are clearly recorded in the Chinese Buddhist texts, so they are not written by anyone in Sri Lanka. I can't understand that there isn't a single inscription or reference of this within Sri Lanka. Why do you think that there might have been?
If I may say something here, I think probably it was due to the decline of the Bhikkhuni Sasana and its virtual collapse until very recently. I think even the records that may have existed could have been lost or whatever. So I think there was nobody to maintain the information, I guess. And then, of course, subsequently, there were actual attempts to suppress the re-establishment of the Bhikkhuni Sasana in Sri Lanka. So there were countervailing forces at work.
That's a very important point. Professor Vatvala, do you have any thoughts?
Actually, nothing from my side because I have really not studied this subject, which I think I must congratulate you for bringing all this data. But then, when you are speaking of the Chinese, what was the situation in Sri Lanka of the Bhikkhuni Sasana at that time?
Yes, that is very good to know. Of course, you know the parallel text in terms of the situation of the Bhikkhuni Sasana are very clearly recorded in not they are of course mentioned and recorded, and the visit of Sangamitta Theri, as you know, I don't have to tell you this, they are of course mentioned in the Mahavamsa. But more than the Mahavamsa, as I see it, and I'm speaking from not as a Buddhist scholar, not as a historian, because that's not my area of experience. My area of experience is the environment. But as a layperson reading, of course, you find very clear information in the Deepavamsa. So parallel to the Deepavamsa, of course, in the Deepavamsa, you have chapter and verse with the Bhikkhuni Sangha since the arrival of Sangamitta Mahatheri and her group of 11, the ordination of Princess Anula Devi Mahatheri, and then, of course, now, as you know, in Anuradhapura, there is now the finding or the excavation of this fantastic monastery complex, about 40 minutes from Anuradhapura, the Anula Devi Sitya. You now have 2 inscriptions already found and deciphered concerning the situation there. So it was arriving, buttressing all the clear facts and data in the Sri Lankan text. Of course, you have Farsian, the Venerable Farsian, who arrived around about that time, and the dates that I have given you, who spent 2 years in Sri Lanka copying texts. So it was not just only Devasara Theri and her Sangha who impacted China, but Farsian says in his travels that having come through, so Farsian came from the northern Chinese kingdoms right down the Silk Route, past Uzbekistan and other areas, spent a lot of time in China, in the northern Chinese region, in the northern now India, and then came to Sri Lanka. But he says the most complete collection of the Tripitaka was at the monasteries in the land of the lion. So we have impacted the world with our texts and our recordings of texts. So he says the fourfold Sangha was flourishing at that time. I'll be happy to later on do a presentation on Farsian, because that also is an extraordinary authenticated, dated collection of information and data about the situation concerning the Sangha at the time in Sri Lanka.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did the Bhikkhuni Sasana established beyond China here?
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Did the Bhikkhuni Sasana established beyond China?
Yes. After China, it went to Korea, to the Korean regions, Mongolia, Bhutan, other areas. Bhikkhuni Sasana is in Thailand, in Cambodia, and Burma, and many other places.
Thank you.
The Bhikkhuni Sasana is also thriving in the tiny small kingdom of Bhutan. Recently, they of course follow the Vajrayana tradition. Recently, the head of the order of the Buddha Dhamma in Bhutan ordained about 3 weeks ago, 250 bhikkhunis were provided with full ordination by the head of the Buddhist order, Jakempo, in the Kingdom of Bhutan.
And I believe in Taiwan,
I
the
would like to comment.
bhikkhunis outnumber the bhikkhus.
Indeed.
Yeah. By considerably, 2/3 of the Sangha are the bhikkhunis, and only a third are. Yes, Anuja.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on the bhikkhunis in Bhutan. They have their own monasteries, and you know, they are beautifully run places. I visited many of those monasteries, which are very similar to the monasteries of the monks. They are up on the mountain, up on the mountains, and I gave a dane also to one of those places with hundreds of bhikkhunis. So it's absolutely thriving in Bhutan. And there's no difference between the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis.
Yes, and may I ask, the bhikkhunis are not being, not being sort of given protection or any sort of thing by the bhikkhus. They are independent and they are capable of holding their own, isn't it? But because there is a trend here in now, well, I haven't been, but I know of center where both are there in the same place. Of course, maybe at some distance, but with saying that the idea is that the bhikkhunis are vulnerable and the bhikkhus have to. I mean, I thought that was not really necessary. The bhikkhunis should be strong enough, one set up to fend for themselves.
Yeah,
At
now
the Kalivala, there are only bhikkhunis.
Yeah, now in Bhutan, there are completely separate bhikkhuni monasteries, those huge buildings on mountain tops. And they are run by bhikkhunis, and there are only bhikkhunis in those places.
Yeah. And now Dekandwala is like that, and there are these Silmata places which are entirely the females, and they're managing very well. In Sri Lanka. Yes, Samantha. Samantha Jayatilaka, would you like to say something?
No, I mean, in the sense that it was really interesting at the beginning, but unfortunately my mum's just come back from hospital and her carer was there, so I was like with the nurse attending to her, so I missed it. I'm really looking forward to listening to it again on the recording. But thank you, Dawn. It was really fascinating and good to know, especially near the Sangamitta time as well. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
So I'd like to just make a few comments about the Chinese Buddhist texts. So I'm going to just inform you how I got this information. nowadays it is not that very difficult. First of all, to tell you, of course, to inform you, and I'm sure you know all this, but Venerable Sujato and Venerable Brahmali, as you know, are the ones who put together the suttacentral.net. So the interesting thing is that in the case of accessing a sutta, you will find that when you go and look up a sutta, like for instance, the Metta Sutta, and you click on the top right parallels section, you will find all the translations of that sutta in the languages where translated. So you will find the Taisho version there. So you have this at your fingertips. Moving on to also the Chinese Buddhist texts, there is a separate website which has a huge, massive collection of all the Chinese Buddhist texts to research and find out. And then you have, of course, got the translations of the Chinese Buddhist texts were available in English. Venerable Analayo has been also at the forefront in doing comparative analyses of Tripitaka Suttas and Chinese sutras to see what the parallels and what the differences are. And this kind of comparative analyses have been taking place for over the past I think, 200 years. I think one of the first to do an extensive comparative analysis was a leading scholar called, I think, Simon or Samuel Beale. And his text is also available online, free of cost. Now, I don't know a single word of Chinese, but the interesting thing, of course, is that I have received from the two venerables very clear information and instructions. But despite the fact that I don't know Chinese, now is not for anybody, including myself, an obstacle, because there are now the language AI models. And there are at least 4 of them that you can key in the text and you get the translations back. And you can make comparisons in terms of the translations. So that's how I now revel in the Chinese Buddhist text. I can tell you that it is absolutely fascinating. Everything in terms of data, all the statistics, all the facts are at your fingertips. You can go straight into either in the Tripitaka or to the Chinese Buddhist texts or any other text pertaining to the Buddha Dhamma, and these can be translated, checked, rechecked within a very short period of time.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? From anyone else? Jayanta Sellaheva from Australia.
No comments, Manori. Thank you. And thank you, Don. As we have already heard, it was very interesting. I learned a lot about the history that I didn't know before. Thank you.
Namdeo Bhujangrao, any comments?
Yes, he's Modak. He is Mr. Namdeo. He's from a Pali scholar from the University of Mumbai. That's where he's logged in from.
Brilliant.
You want to say something? Unmute and some problem he's having.
Preeti Pereira, any comments? Beg your pardon, I can't hear you.
No.
Dhruv Ratnayaka, any comments?
It's very good, excellent. I learned a lot of things which I didn't know about before about them. It's very, very good. Very pretty.
Wonderful. It's interesting, isn't it? The impact of the Sri Lankan Bhikkhuni Sangha is quite remarkable. It's breathtaking when you look at it.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly, yes. Very, very good. Thank you very much. It's lovely. It's very good.
You're welcome, ma'am.
So, Don, here in this case, the civilization development of an already civilized country, wasn't it? That is what is remarkable.
Yes. And that country doesn't necessarily, in terms of intellect, take prisoners. I mean, either you are excellent or you're not excellent. When you look at the civilizational situation in China at that time. So this is what, of course, makes me I shouldn't be saying this.
I'm putting it in presentation. Yes.
Yes, please go ahead, sir.
Yes, can I?
Yes, go ahead.
Can I ask you? Yeah, may. Okay, I'm Ravi Jayasekar here, Don, and all the Dhamma friends. The question to you is, how did all these Chinese scriptures survive the Mao era, the Red Guards ransacking all the temples and all other places and creating so much of havoc? Any idea about that?
No, I think that Chinese Buddhist texts and their temples and others survived.
Okay. Because there was a great upheaval, they were ransacking, and the great march forward by Chairman Mao and the Red Guards. So I was just thinking, it was mentioned that they destroyed many of these monasteries and documents. So anyway, it's very happy that these things have survived. And thank you very much. And talking about Fahian is, as you mentioned, and it's recorded, not only visited Abhegiri, he also, the records say that he also came to Ratnapura and climbed the Sripad, Adam's Peak. I don't know whether that part of the story is correct, Don. That he also climbed Adam's Peak with a Bhante called Medankara, who was from Ratnapura, who was living in Abhegiri.
I haven't explored that particular section.
Yes.
But it is highly probable if it is in the script, if it is in the text, it is easily. If it is in the text, this kind of information is easily verifiable now.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, because
great presentation.
You have both the English translations of the Travels of Fashion, which are available to download for free, and you have also the Chinese version, the original text of Venerable Fashion, which is also available to be examined forensically available for free.
Certainly, correct. Agree with you. And there's also, I think, a single translation by a professor. Then I think it's available in some of the bookshops, like in Mardan area. I just saw during the last book fair, travel so far into the Western lands or something, a single translation. Yeah, one Professor Balagal or somebody. Yeah. I just faintly